Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits. Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! There are many other places to find us, of course. At Instagram, perhaps, at Primus Tracks. And Threads. There's a Facebook page called Primus Tracks, I believe. That is maintained by the man at the 39th floor of Primus Tracks Towers looking down upon the wonderful, beautiful streets of Mexico City. It's Frankie Berestein.
Hi, Josh.
Welcome back, Frankie. You're always game. You've never said no to coming on. I mean, it's your podcast too, but you've never said no. Today we are discussing the second track from Les Claypool Frog Brigade's Pruple Onion record. It is titled David Makalaster. It's a fun name to say. I always want to say Makalaster, Frankie, and not because of your love for the Home Alone films. Although that's well documented. There is a small college in Minnesota called Makalaster College, and the spelling is the same as David Makalaster. However, the K is replaced with a C in Makalaster College. Before we talk about today's track, David Makalaster, Frankie, it's miscellaneous debris time.
Well, Josh, for miscellaneous debris today, I just wanted to point out that Sesenta is done. They performed the final show of the tour in New York, and Sean Lennon actually made a guest appearance on Southbound Pachyderm, which he has previously done with Primus in other circumstances.
Ah, yes. So Sesenta is done. No more. It is dead and buried. Maynard's 60th birthday, finally, the longest birthday celebration I've ever been a part of. Finally over. The cake must all be gone. The games have finished. The party's over. Brave of him to celebrate his birthday over 21 nights across the United States and bringing our pals in Primus along. Good times. So now we have a couple of Primus headlining dates to look forward to here in the month of May before they take a break and then hit the road as a headliner for much of July and August.
Indeed.
So, a well-deserved break for those guys. You know, when you go out on the road for 21 dates celebrating somebody else's birthday and you're playing 7 or 8 songs a night, you get a little tired.
Unless you have a chairlift.
You're right. Now, we are going to discuss David Makalaster, which is a unique track in and of itself, Frankie, because on this record we have David Makalaster and David Makalaster 2. I am going to resist the urge to discuss David Makalaster 2 throughout this episode. As much as I want to compare the two tracks, we'll save it for when we finally get to David Makalaster 2.
Yes.
It just stands to reason because we're going track by track, and it's as if we are listening to the record again for the first time.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to be the best version of myself. With that in mind, you can help me be an even better version of myself by informing me about the live history of this track.
David Makalaster 1 was premiered on April 18th, 2002 in Seattle, Washington. The intro has always been played in a variety of different ways, sometimes echoing the guitar riff from the album version, but that happened much less frequently than the arrangement they made for the most of the live performances, where it began with the I-O melody, with the guitar entering a bit later. In either format, the song has always been a jam vehicle. It has always been extended during live performances, reaching anywhere between 10 to 15 to even 20 minutes, becoming a staple Claypool solo number prevalent at several tours. Les would often use the I-O part to encourage the audience to chant along. In other occasions, Brian Kehoe would sing the chant in an operatic voice. Other times, Les would also encourage Skerik to sing the chant. Since its incarnation, the song remained a setlist constant throughout 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2005, The Fancy Band premiered their arrangement of the song on June 30th, 2005 at the High Sierra Music Festival. It remained in heavy rotation at Fancy Band's setlist throughout 2005, 6, 7, and 2008. It was performed with Merv on guitar at Bonnaroo 2008, which we have sampled previously on an LSD episode, and also with a unique Rat Brigade performance. The Fungi Band premiered their version of the song on January 4th, 2009 at Jam Cruise. The Fungi Band version was also jammed, but frequently incorporated a Southbound Pachyderm portion during the bridge. So David Makalaster essentially became synonym with Southbound Pachyderm during that era. The song made a surprise return for the Frog Brigade concerts of the last year. It was interesting that sometimes the band would perform Makalaster 1 and then they would perform a different song, but there were also cases where they would perform Makalaster 1 and Makalaster 2 back to back, which Sean Lennon actually pointed out was one of his favorite things to do during the tour. These 2023 renditions of David Makalaster also incorporated Southbound Pachyderm into the thesis, which is interesting considering that they would also do Southbound Pachyderm in its entirety during the encore of the sets. But, I guess at this point, Southbound Pachyderm is kind of impossible to disassociate from Makalaster. So that's the life history of this fantastic number.
Southbound Pachyderm, a song so nice they'll play it twice.
Exactly.
Now, David Makalaster has a lot of performances, and I'm glad you pointed out the different incarnations of bands that have played this throughout the years. And the resurrection for the 2023 tour of the Frog Brigade was quite welcome. It did get a 2017 performance at the Hop Monk for a wine party.
Correct.
But before that, it had not seen the light of day since 2010. So what a great time. 13 years, essentially, for this song to finally make its return. And it looks like it was played almost every single night, nearly every single night on the Frog Brigade tour of 2023. Did you get it in the New York show that you went to?
Wow, I didn't get it. That's crazy. But I did get Holy Mackerel.
Well, that is quite a nice substitution.
That more than makes up for it.
Absolutely. I did get David Makalaster at the Forest Grove, Oregon show in the summer of 23, which was quite delightful, as it is a personal favorite of mine from this record. 259 documented performances, courtesy of Toasterland there. And many of the iterations that you mentioned, Frankie, those recordings can be heard over on Toasterland. So use up all the guys' bandwidth. On the studio recording, Frankie, our credits are as follows. Les Claypool, bass, guitar, and vocals. So that guitar part that we so often associate with Enor, or nowadays, I suppose, Sean Lennon, that's Les on the record. Jay Lane on drums, always welcome in our world. Mike Dillon, vibraphone, metal drum, and percussion. Skerik is credited for regular saxophone and fancy saxophone.
Wow.
When he busts out the fancy sax, you know something is about to go down. Side note, it's pretty cool to see that all four of these guys have joined us on Primus Tracks at one time or another. This is kind of the core. This is kind of the core of the Frog Brigade in terms of the first iteration with Jay Lane on drums, Skerik on saxophone, and Mike Dillon making his way into the lineup where he would stay for many, 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 many years.
Right.
Really, really cool to see this lineup on this track, which after the appetizer, I suppose, of Purple Onion serves as the first true tune or song of any kind of construction on this album. This one checks in at 4 minutes and 41 seconds. It's longer than I remember, Frankie, but it certainly has plenty going for it. It's not like the 441 sticks around too long. Quite a few parts to this one. Let's hear the intro. What I appreciate is we get the Yo-Ho preview. That part will come back around. And the part that faded out, of course, leads us into the first verse, which we hear that come around quite a bit in the first half of the tune. Fun little Jay Lane drum fill to open things up. And the thing that I've always associated with this track, or this record especially, is the production value. I think everything sounds pretty good.
Incredibly crisp.
Yeah, crisp and clear. The drums are pushed back a little bit, but I think that's by design to fit the rest of the band in there, because we do have a lot of tracks with numerous people contributing. And this one is no exception. That guitar is so compressed and tinny, and I love the tone he got from that. It sounds almost like a toy guitar. I don't know if you remember these toy guitars, Frankie, but they were just little plastic things, and you press some buttons or goofed around on them and it would make sounds mimicking electric, like distortion electric guitar sounds, and it sounded like that. It was this tinny little thing that was supposed to make you feel like a rock star. But Les is playing a cool little number there on the guitar. The bass sounds nice and rubbery and bouncy, as we're used to. But you were talking a bit about the intro, so that intro drum fill is not played like that in the live versions.
And with that guitar intro, it didn't always get played as per studio version during the live performances. Sometimes they would go straight into the other part.
Oh, is that so? Okay, so the arrangement changed a bit for some of these live cuts.
Yes.
Oh, I was not aware of that. And it's funny you say that, because I just saw this tune less than a year ago performed live, and I couldn't tell you how they started it now. Oops. It's a good thing our pal Kevin recorded that show, and I should go back and listen to it. Great little opener there. We should listen to a portion of the first verse.
David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster, and my lips are moving faster than my mind can comprehend. I'm David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster, so call me Mr. Billy now, but think of me as friend.
Very sing-songy, which we're becoming used to in the Claypool oeuvre, especially in the solo works. And what really jumps out at me is Jay, of course, on the hi-hat. You have to listen pretty closely, but it's there. He's doing very Jay Lane work on the hi-hat. And Mike D's accents and embellishments with the metal drum and the percussion during the vocalized parts, as well as the instrumental breaks in between the delivery of the verses, is fantastic. I really love how it's providing more depth to the proceedings. And of course, Skerik's in there. The guitar's in there. The bass is doing its thing with that bouncy bass line.
I love the duality of the track in terms of the instrumentation and the atmosphere, because the David Makalaster 10 o'clock newscaster portions are kind of ominous, right? Mm-hmm. But the Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live in a World portion is very upbeat, and it's so bouncy, right? So it's like you have two songs coexisting in the same track at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like, I could be wrong, but it sounds like he's strumming some fifths during the verse when he's using the newscaster voice. And then he's doing the ba-deem, beep, 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 ba-deem, that really upbeat, bouncy, happy sounding approach on the bass during the Wouldn't It Be Nice delivery. So those two different vocal deliveries, you're right, are supported by some choices with the instrumentation. And that's the voices is something I wanted to comment on, because we of course are used to the standard Les Claypool vocal delivery, and the newscaster voice is not it. So he gets in that lower register, and I'm David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster. He's going to that lower register, and I'm sure those of you watching the video on patreon.com/Primus Tracks saw me exaggerating my mouth movements because that is something newscasters do in order to, one, not bungle their words, but two, to sound very clear in their speaking and deliver what it is they're to deliver. But also, I suppose, it helps with their delivery down there. You know, I'm Walter Cronkite, which I believe I've done that before on this podcast. I really like that voice he affects here. But then we get the more standard delivery during that chorus. And let's hear that part, contrasted with what we just witnessed.
About the things that make you happy, about the things that make you smile. Lay back, relax, apathy's back in style.
Which, of course, is married to that lyric, lay back, relax, apathy's back in style. Mike D's vibraphone part there is so simple, following the melody, but it is just perfect for it.
And we have yet another juxtaposition there, because the music is very upbeat, right? And it conveys happiness. However, what the lyrics indicate is that in order to achieve that sensation, you pretty much have to live your life blindfolded, right?
Right. You have to tune out. You have to drop out, stop listening, turn your brain off, and that's when you can achieve that happiness and relaxation. Through apathy, through not acting, not listening, more or less not caring. And that's, and once again, what Mike D's doing throughout is great. And I do recall in an interview around the time of album release in 2002, Frankie, Les said, you know, I built these songs up and then I brought people in with nobody specific in mind and let them embellish the songs or add to them, that he was able to get Mike D and Skerik, and of course Jay on drums, who really drives it. But to get Mike D and Skerik in here to do their things and have Mike D doing many different things provides such atmosphere and depth. Speaking of Skerik, he's playing a real supporting role throughout, and he often does this in the Frog Brigade during verses and parts where he doesn't have a defined riff or lick to play. He's often just giving bits and pieces of support, which we hear through the first part of this song. I have about 20 seconds I want to play, Frankie, and I simply, in my notes, just labeled it Skerik.
I just want to point out before you play that sample that you bring a very interesting point.
Yeah.
Skerik serves the songs on the studio recordings, but he completely lets loose in the live performances, which I think is a great balance.
Yeah, especially, of course, when he's soloing, he goes off the deep end. But I do, from live recordings, especially from around 2002, that I remember listening to years ago, he certainly contributes more in the spots where he may have been simply giving one or two notes. He's providing more. And then, of course, when he's soloing, he is taking us to space and back again. Doubling the bass, and then... that part goes hard.
Totally.
Skerik's bringing some fire. Jay's opening it up a bit on the kit, but everybody's playing their part underneath, and it's got so many things happening. It's a busy tune, and in that part particularly, with even though it's limited in time and scope, Skerik, as I mentioned, is doubling that bass line and then taking off from there, which is always a satisfying musical thing.
That portion that you sampled is pretty much a wall of sound.
Apologies to the Grateful Dead. Wall of sound. The following part is probably the one that earns the most fan interaction in an average Frog Brigade show. I'd imagine that being the yo-hos. As you may recall, Frankie, our pal, Johnny Perona, but right before his Frog Brigade show last summer, posted a video of himself and his young daughter practicing their yo-hos before they went to the show that night. That was cute. It's, of course, sing-songy. It's easy to remember. It's a lot of fun. So in a lot of these recordings, especially on Toasterland, you're going to hear when the bottom drops out of the music, you're going to hear Les exhort the crowd to join him in some yo-hos and then continue it as the music continues again. The thing I'm going to point out right before I press play here, Frankie, is for years, I heard on this studio version, I heard, yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Without even realizing that there was this sub-vocalized ho. So it was yo ho, yo ho, yo, yo, yo ho. Not something I'd noticed for quite some time. Don't recall when I, of course, first realized that that was the case. But it opened up the tune for me, and now I understand the power of the yo ho.
Not until you pointed that out, actually. I was just aware of I-O, I-O. I never heard a ho thrown in there.
So I'll play this part. You got to listen very carefully after the yo
Okay.
ho. Once again, it's almost sub-vocalized. It's almost not present.
Okay, let's see if I can catch it, or if my hearing is very damaged at this point.
Too many Marilyn Manson shows, Frankie.
Yeah.
Cradle of Filth. Come on, man. Catch yourself a hoe.
Yeah, I picked up on it, but just because I was ready to hear it, because you pointed it out. Otherwise, I would not have picked up on it. So it's a Mandela thing.
If you're listening for it, you'll hear it. But if you're listening casually, it doesn't necessarily register, and it certainly didn't for me for quite some time. That was an earworm for me upon release in 2002 when I first heard the record, and it remains to this day something that I will sing or hum to myself unconsciously. Although I gotta say, Frankie, it's slowly being replaced with eep-eep-eep.
Inevitably.
Well, those are my highlights of the tune. Ending with the yo-hos, I think, is a really nice way to do it. I will point out, though, that in the last minute or so of the song, we get another iteration of the sing-songy chorus, and we get a nice, solid, structured ending to this one. And I think that is because, with Les having this David Makalaster and Makalaster 2 in mind, he wanted to wrap this one up in a musical way, so that when it came back around, those musical themes were present. So it's a fairly nice, tight tune.
Like you mentioned, I love how there are so many things going on with it that it's impossible to get bored listening to it. It's got a lot of passages, different sections. The contrast, right, between the verses and the chorus is quite interesting. You have this wall of sound. You also have the sparse sections. So it makes for quite an interesting listening. And I mean, if you consider Purple Onion to be just kind of an intro throwaway, but not an actual track, then I believe David Makalaster is compelling enough to open the Purple Onion record in terms of the statement Les was trying to make with the group of musicians that he had for this project.
I think so. I think this is musically really structured strongly, and of course the performances are great. I do think it does send that message of really informed and thoughtful songwriting, and I think we get it throughout the record too. And as we know, these many of these tunes had gestated for quite some time, given that they were performed live well before this album was released. Makalaster included. I think you said April 2002, so many
That's
months
correct.
ahead of album release. So these tunes were knocking around in his head, I'm sure, for months, if not years.
And what do you think about the lyrics?
We have a nice internal rhyme in the first line of each stanza. I'm David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster. Clearly the name Makalaster had to make the rhyme work. So Makalaster it is, to go with newscaster. We get a picture of a talking head, and that's a loaded term, of course, who is saying things that even he doesn't understand, and is essentially what I would call an empty vessel, delivering some kind of message or propaganda. To contrast that with the chorus of "Isn't it awfully nice to live in a world," and so on and so forth, to me, these lyrics are born from the events of 9/11, especially when we examine both Makalaster and Mac 2 together and the themes of each. So my takeaway is this is essentially September 10th. And this is what we were being fed by TV news on September 10th. And Mac 2 is what we were fed starting on September 11th going forward for many,
It's
many
a very
reasons.
interesting interpretation.
And I think it holds because let's take a look at verse 1. I'm David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster. My lips are moving faster than my mind can comprehend. I'm just saying things. I don't know what they are.
I'm just reading.
I'm
A
reading
prompter.
a prompter. Exactly. The next couplet, I'm David Makalaster, your 10 o'clock newscaster. Some call me Mr. Macallymouth, but think of me as friend. So some people just think I'm a talking head or a mouth on a screen, but I'm your friend. And of course, that's always a dangerous proposition when a media figure is our friend, because they're probably a grifter. With that in mind, the next couplet, if you believe the things I tell you, I have a bridge or two to sell you. And since I've cut my intake down, my liver's on the mend. Are you familiar with I have a bridge to sell you, Frankie, that cultural idiom?
No, please tell me about it.
I have a bridge to sell you is a cultural idiom that comes from, it actually comes from a true story. There was a guy in New York City named George C. Parker. This is late 19th century, early 20th century. And he was a career con man. And one thing that George C. Parker did in New York City was he would set up fake real estate offices, and he would con people into believing they were buying various landmarks around New York City. He, air quotes, sold the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, the Brooklyn Bridge, among other things. I mean, he was arrested for fraud, and eventually he was thrown in prison for life. He actually died in Sing Sing prison in New York. Probably the most notable fact about him is he, quote unquote, sold the Brooklyn Bridge numerous times to suckers who thought they were actually buying the bridge. And the only reason that he was found out is the people that were buying the bridge would try to install toll booths on the Brooklyn Bridge, and then the New York City police would come and remove them and say, you can't do that. This belongs to the city. And they said, well, wait, this Parker guy told me I was buying this bridge from the city. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you, or some variation thereof, comes from the story of George C. Parker, who actually sold bridges to people when he was not the rightful owner or representative of the owners. Fascinating guy. The one thing I did read about him was, and as most confidence men are, he was quite charismatic and charming. And one thing I read about him was he was really popular in prison because he had a lot of stories to tell and was a really likable fella.
What do you think is the meaning of if you see the spider, don't spoil your curtain away?
Are you familiar with the nursery rhyme Little Miss Muffet?
No.
Okay, this is an old English nursery rhyme, and I learned this as a child because it's sing-songy as well. And so that's another connection I want to make is these nursery rhymes that Les draws from sometimes are so sing-songy that I think they inform his lyric writing and his melody writing to be sing-songy and feel almost simplistic like some of these nursery rhymes. Feel simplistic, not actually be simplistic. It goes like this. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider, sat down beside her, and frightened Miss Muffet away. I don't think there's a moral to that tale. It's just a goofy little rhyming thing that you tell kids. The idea of if you see the spider, don't spill your curds and whey is don't be like Little Miss Muffet and have your day ruined, by the scary thing, I suppose. Lay back, relax. There's no reason to be scared, which goes right into that message of the chorus. I do like the line, since I've cut my intake down, my liver's on the mend. That's clearly a reference to alcohol abuse. So
Yeah.
And then that chorus, yeah, all you have to do is sit around and dream about the things that make you happy, the things that make you smile, lay back, relax, apathy's back in style. So a nice rhyme scheme again, A, and so on. I love that exhortation, lay back, relax, apathy's back in style. It's going to be fine. Just give up your cares. Moving into verse 2, I firmly execute every word I say. Not entirely sure what that means, but I might have to do with that pronunciation and over-exaggerated delivery. They must have done their market research and polling because he says only 6% of America thinks that I am gay. And then there's the bridge or two to sell you again. If you see the spider, don't spill your curds and whey. Don't be upset. Everything's fine. And the good evening and here's what's new, of course, is a reference to some kind of greeting from a newscaster. A lot of great stuff in these lyrics, actually. And once again, I think some of these themes will be more prevalent when we get to Mac 2. For now,
very interesting.
For now, lay back and relax, Frankie. Everything's fine. That's what the media is telling us.
I love how Les just pulls these idioms and references and metaphors from all over the place, and some of them date back to so long ago. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure he heard Little Miss Muffet or read it in a nursery rhyme book when he was a child as well. It's one of those that has sustained itself for centuries at this point. It's pretty clever to use that line, if you see the spider, don't spill your curds and whey. I do like that incorporation of it there. I think that's pretty darn clever. From getting some insight on some of those lines, is that changing your interpretation of the lyrics?
The way that you interpreted them has shed some light for me culturally, because, I mean, for me, Makalaster was just this character in the Claypool universe that was a guy delivering the news, of course, following a prompter. But now that you mentioned September 10 being the setting for this track, and then Makalaster 2 being the afterman, I mean, culturally, it has a different meaning for me. Of course, I didn't make that association because that event, I guess it resonates more for you in your mind than it does for me.
Oh, likely so. Yeah. Now, I have a question for you. Are there any short and sweet and rhyming nursery rhymes in Espanol that you can drop on us right now?
I'm sure there are a lot, but none come to mind right now. I'm much more familiarized with Cockabura and how, that's an Australian nursery rhyme, and how it sparked an incredible legal battle with Men at Work, because they pretty much ripped off the melody of that nursery rhyme for Down Under, and they lost the case.
Oh. Well, that's unfortunate. That's such a catchy song. Here's a little jingle we haven't heard in a while. Yeah. And if you would like your takes read on this podcast, all you have to do is go over to patreon.com/Primus Tracks. One of the many benefits over there is I'll post a thread about the tune up for discussion, and you get to comment on it. I'll read it right here. For example, John Shreve says, after the obligatory title track, this one was like a reminder that Primus had broken up. Great live experience. The song reminds me of driving to the mountains and setting up camp. He's got himself a personal experience to draw on there, Frankie. And the creator of this here jingle you're hearing right now, Johnny Perona, says, as was the case with all non-Primus Claypool projects during this time, around 2002, I was fundamentally opposed to this whole record when it was released. But even my cynical 20-year-old self couldn't deny the utterly weird and wonderful quirkiness of this track. Saw it performed live at the very first Bonnaroo, and it was a highlight of the set for me. Fast forward to 2023, and Les is leading a thunderous sing-along to the Yo-Ho part. It's a top 5 Primus and Les song for me, and was very happy to catch it. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Johnny, because I do remember carrying some umbrage, I suppose, that Primus was seemingly dead forever in 2002, and going, well, I guess I got to get down with the Frog Brigade for good. But I was pleasantly surprised by the album as opposed to being opposed to it and actively not liking it. Brooks Delight says, for me, this album is an absolute masterpiece, and this song is a super fun way to kick things off. It sets the tone beautifully and really lets the listener know what to expect from the rest of the record. Once again, succinct and intelligent, and Brooks gives the 12-second version of what we're taking an hour to say.
I guess in the future, when society has reached a point where people's lifestyles are so quick that they cannot sit down to listen to an hour-long podcast, Brooks' interpretations will be the compact versions of each episode for people to listen to and understand the songs.
Absolutely. Brooks Breaks It Down will be our 1 minute max episodes on YouTube. If you don't want to listen to Josh and Frankie, listen to me. Blah, blah, blah. Done. David Fraser Crane says, this track didn't speak to me during my first listen 2 decades ago. However, after seeing it performed live by the Brigade last year, I have a deeper appreciation for it. Makalaster is now my most trusted news source. I got bad news for you, David. I don't think that's the point of the song. You may actually have fallen for the ruse. Ryan Rashawn says, Purple Onion hooked me in right away, but Makalaster didn't quite grab me until half a dozen or more spins. Certainly a curious choice to be the first proper song. And our pal Wamola17 says, I'm Ron Burgundy? And there are definitely Anchorman parallels here. Of course, Anchorman, I think, came after Purple Onion. But I see him too. He says, nothing like waking up and belting out some good old-fashioned yo-hos. It's a bouncy, fun song with deep commentary about the laziness of the American culture. You dream for it, but no longer do people work for it. Oh, see, there's another interesting interpretation. And finally, Anthony Del Preet, go Bills, says this felt different from anything Les had done to this point. And I can certainly see where he's coming from there. He says his stomping bass line and the main riff is standard Claypool goodness, but the melodic nature of the song, in addition to the vocal melodies and some cool-ass yo-hos, make this a great and unique semi-opener for the genius of Purple Onion. I think we have ourselves some fans here, Frankie.
Fantastic interpretation.
Thank you all, Primatrons, for that commentary. We still don't have a Live Cuts jingle. We need a Live Cuts jingle.
Yes, indeed.
If you have the wherewithal and the ability to create a Live Cuts jingle that we can play every time we move to Live Cuts, please send it to primustrackspod@gmail.com. We would love to parse through some submissions for a jingle. In the meantime, we'll go without. Frankie, you have sent me a bevy of live cuts for David Makalaster. Not the entirety of each one. Because of the 4 you've sent, here are the track lengths. 18, 15, 11, and 12 minutes. I can hear Soya vomiting right now.
Yeah, that seems the standard for Makalaster.
Our first live cut is from Burlington, Vermont in 2002. And we get to hear, now I didn't point it out earlier, but you did say the phrase jam vehicle a couple of times. And I didn't do the air horns or whatever it is I'm supposed to do every time you say jam vehicle. But we are going to hear a jam vehicle from this very show. Here we go. Fancy sax. Oh yeah. I think those of you that enjoy your live frog recordings should be checking out the Burlington 2002 show. That sounds great. Let's move forward to some yo-hos. Thanks for including this, Frankie. My favorite part.
The chat goes, yeah, 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 yeah,
Now, if you are a spiritual individual and you believe in such things, chant along with me at this moment. We'll do the O's.
Oh, they've got it.
So now I'm looking out at the audience, and I see a good number of you chanting away. Those of you who are not chanting, I'm assuming you're either atheist or agnostic, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a Christian thing, it's just spirituality. So those of you that aren't chanting right now, you're either atheist or agnostic, am I correct? You, sir, you're not chanting. You're atheist. Okay. So let's hear from the atheists now.
I like that. Let's hear from the atheists. Trying to get everybody to chant, even the atheists. Now, we should point out this is in the Ira Allen Chapel on the campus of the University of Vermont. So I suppose that colored his approach there.
Yeah.
And we have some cello, you say, on this one. Is this Sam Bass?
I believe it is.
Ah, very good. And we should point out, yeah, the guitar part that we hear on the studio recording, of course, is replicated by Enor for many, many years. And then into the Fungi Band, Sam Bass takes over that guitar melody on David Makalaster. Here he is in 2002 doing some stuff. This reminds me that last summer at the Frog Brigade show, Les was asked about doing something with a symphony, and he did say that there had been discussions about doing Primus with a string quartet. However, hearing this, and knowing that Sam Bass played with Les for many years and did a lot of his solo output, I think some Les Claypool Frog Brigade type tunes could get the symphony/quartet treatment and sound fantastic.
So there's actually a correction to be made here. Sam Bass was actually at the show, but he performed as a guest on Barrington Hall, and Ben Barnes performed as a guest on David Makalaster.
Oh, that's Ben Barnes. Very good.
Ben Barnes. What I do wonder is if what we just heard was actually a cello or a violin, because I'm at Ben Barnes' website right now, and he offers violin, viola, and guitar lessons.
Could have been a violin, could have been a viola, I suppose.
Yeah. With no available video footage, I guess it will be a mystery for the time being.
In the certainly in the upper registers of a cello, you can attain that pitch. Let's see what Toaster says. It just says Ben Barnes sat in.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what instrument.
Thanks, Toaster.
Our next live cut is from the Fillmore. Legendary live venue in San Francisco. We're going to hear some Skerik.
Skerik! Show them how it is done.
fun. I love the Yo-Hos. Next, we're going to the Jam Cruise 2009. Now, this one says cello. Is this for real cello or is this viola? What is this one, Frankie?
Gee, I don't even know anymore.
It is a stringed instrument
Yeah.
of some sort. All right. Let's hear it. Scrubbing. That is indeed Sam Bass on cello.
Indeed.
Thanks, Toaster.
Thank you,
Sincerely
Toaster.
this time. You know who we haven't heard in some of these live cuts? Good old Greasy D. Oh, yeah. You can tell Les loves to play with Mike just in this clip. Yes. And finally, from Jam Cruise. I hope you guys aren't seasick yet. This is the Pachyderm. Fan service. But notice how he gives it that shuffle. Da, da, da,
Yeah.
da, 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 da. Nice. Nice. This is Bonnaroo 2008. Another lengthy rendition of David Makalaster. 11
We're
minutes.
highlighting the intro because in this live rendition, they actually perform the intro according to the album version, which they didn't do in the other versions that we heard.
Bonnaroo. Oh, yeah. This is where the vocals would be. There they are.
So Merv was playing on the guitar what Les played on the studio version.
Yes, and in this lineup we had Les on bass, of course, Merv on guitar, Sam Bass on cello, and Paulo on drums. So they had that flexibility. Thank you for those live cuts, Frankie. The nice part about this tune, and I think many of these Purple Onion tunes, is that we'll be able to hear from a rich history over the last 20 years of different iterations, different bands, and different renditions of this tune.
Glad you enjoyed them.
Yeah, it's bringing back some memories of when I really enjoyed hunting down these live recordings on places like Dime or the other one with Oink or Piggy or whatever it was called. So I'll say this. Cut to commercial, David Makalaster, because you've been tracked. Next time, Frankie, we're going speeding through Green Hill.
My favorite track from the entire record. Can't wait for that one.
Thank you all so much for listening, Primates. That was David Makalaster. We'll eventually get to David Makalaster too. If you know your track list, you know it'll be a while. Buzzards of Green Hill next week. Primus headlining shows coming up. Lots to be excited
Exciting times.
in later days.
Whaley Mace.